This is Medical Device Legal News. Today is April 11th, 2023. I'm Sam Bernstein. On April 4th, 2023, Genotox Laboratories agreed to pay $5.9 million to resolve False Claims Act allegations that it paid volume-based commissions to third-party marketing firms and independent contractor sales representatives in violation of the federal anti-kickback statute. While this case was not against a medical device manufacturer, it serves as an important reminder that the Department of Justice has and continues to prosecute companies for paying commissions to independent contractor sales representatives. The company also entered into a 5-year corporate integrity agreement and an 18-month deferred prosecution agreement with the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Western District of Texas. Genotox was alleged to have paid kickbacks to independent contractor sales representatives and marketing firms to arrange for laboratory testing in violation of the anti-kickback statute, including paying 1099 sales representatives on a commission basis. The laboratory was also alleged to have submitted claims for blanket, routine, and medically unnecessary orders. As you may be aware, the Personal Services Safe Harbor to the federal anti-kickback statute does provide protection for certain types of arrangements with independent contractors. However, the Personal Services Safe Harbor does not protect arrangements, including compensation to an independent contractor sales representative, that is determined in a manner that takes into account the volume or value of business or the value of referrals otherwise generated between the parties for which payment may be made under federal healthcare programs. Conversely, the bona fide employment safe harbor to the anti-kickback statute provides more flexibility to medical device manufacturers in structuring compensation arrangements. Accordingly, medical device manufacturers should be aware of the risk of violating the anti-kickback statute by paying commissions to independent contractor sales representatives. On April 5th, 2023, Magellan Diagnostics, Inc.'s former CEO, COO, and quality assurance director were arrested and indicted on charges they allegedly hid a malfunction in the company's widely used blood lead test that often produced false low results. The malfunction allegedly was related to the incubation period and the effect that the incubation period had on the detected levels of lead. The defendants have been charged with wire fraud conspiracy to defraud the United States government, and the introduction of misbranded medical devices into interstate commerce. The lead care testing systems were originally recalled in May of 2017. This is an interesting case where the government is alleging that executives concealed a serious malfunction from the FDA and from consumers, allegedly lied about when they became aware of the issue, failed to timely submit medical device reports on time, and failed to adequately address the malfunction. The indictment also alleges that Magellan changed the label and the design of their products without notifying the FDA. While this case involved allegations of direct misconduct, as you may be aware, corporate officers of medical device manufacturers may also be held criminally liable for misdemeanor violations of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act under the doctrine referred to as the Park Doctrine. Under the Park Doctrine, corporate officers that have responsibility and authority either to prevent Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act violations in the first instance, or to promptly correct them and fail to do so, may be held criminally liable under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, even if they had no knowledge of or involvement in the misconduct. While Park Doctrine prosecutions are relatively rare, we've seen increased use of the Park Doctrine by the Department of Justice and increasing recommendations by the Food Drug Administration for its use over the last 10 to 15 years. A common situation where the Department of Justice may use the Park Doctrine to prosecute a case is where a corporate officer or officers fail to establish or monitor regulatory controls at an applicable manufacturer. Accordingly, medical device executives should be aware that they may face personal criminal exposure if they fail to establish or monitor appropriate regulatory controls or fail to address issues brought to their attention. On April 3rd, the FDA issued draft guidance seeking comments on the recommendations for including a predetermined change control plan for artificial intelligence or machine learning enabled device software functions in a marketing submission, so in the 510K, PMA, or de novo. And this is for machine learning enabled device software functions. This is an update from the FDA's 2019 discussion paper regarding the same topic. And the FDA has had a number of discussions and panels regarding this topic since that time. This guidance was issued as a result of the December 2022 adoption of Section 515C of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, which addresses predetermined change control plans. So what is a predetermined change control plan? So this is a plan that you can include in your 510K, PMA, or de novo to allow modifications to a product based on either an automated or a manually implemented machine learning change. So you're training a device on data sets via AI or machine learning, and it can update and change the functions of the device, the inputs, the outputs, as long as it stays within the same intended use and indications for use. And it allows you to avoid the need to submit additional marketing submissions when the machine learning modifications change the software function. So it effectively allows you to, in submitting marketing submission in advance, obtain approval or clearance for expected changes to your product based on machine learning. This is draft guidance issued for the purpose of seeking comments, so it doesn't establish any rights, is not binding on the FDA, and may not ultimately serve as the FDA's final thinking on this topic, depending on changes in response to stakeholder comments. The comment period is currently open, so you can make comments on this guidance on and before July 3rd of 2023. Generally, the guidance recommends that a PCCP include 3 separate components. One is a detailed description of the planned device modification. So this is a list of the various changes that you may make to your product based on machine learning that you facilitate through training the software on various data sets. You'll want to list all potential changes through those data sets, as the FDA would require a new 510K, PMA, and de novo if you change the PCCP and change the list of changes. So when you submit your original PCCP, you will want to think carefully about including all the potential modifications you might want to make to the software. The second component of a PCCP is a modification protocol that's going to be used to develop, validate, and implement those modifications in a manner so as to ensure the continued safety and efficacy of the device across the relevant patient populations, whether it's across patients with certain conditions or certain other demographics. So that is a risk mitigation protocol. And the final component is an impact assessment to describe the assessment of the benefits and risks of the planned modifications, and also to address any risk mitigations that you're including in your policies and procedures. Effectively, how will you ensure that your device, when it is trained on these data sets, will not raise safety concerns or cease to be effective? What is the process for validating that data? And it's important to use data validation techniques when implementing a PCCP. The guidance includes a number of helpful examples of each of these 3 different types of components. And again, the primary goal here is that if you would like to make a modification to a software or device function that would potentially affect the safety or effectiveness of the device, such that you would require pre-market authorization and clearance, a PCCP would allow you to make those changes, assuming that it's covered under your original PCCP without submitting a new marketing submission. The FDA recommends using the Q submission process to obtain feedback on a proposed PCCP prior to submission. The FDA also, in this guidance document, gave a number of examples of different types of products for which a PCCP might be applicable. Some of these are very interesting. So, for example, software that monitors physiological signals and issues an alarm in an acute or high acuity setting that's trained on data sets using machine learning to modify its sensitivity in different clinical circumstances. Another example would be skin lesion identification software that uses machine learning to use a new image acquisition system. So, for example, to use different cameras on a different portable mobile device so that the skin lesion identification software could be used on multiple different devices effectively to train the software so it can be used with newer devices or different devices. Another interesting example would be software functions that adjust ventilator settings, and the software is trained using machine learning to adjust settings on a ventilator for different subset of patients with particular conditions. So, for example, to treat COVID patients differently from patients in pulmonary failure. 2 other interesting examples, an ultrasound image acquisition assistance device that would alert the operator if it detects abnormalities and adjust parameters to optimize identification. And that device, for example, could be trained on machine learning data sets to identify abnormalities and otherwise adjusted settings based on identified characteristics of the image. And then the final example that they gave is a feeding tube placement system where a piece of software will scan a radiograph of feeding tube placement and analyze the placement to assist with the prioritization of the review of those radiographs so that feeding tube placements where there's a higher likelihood of misplacement are reviewed first. And in that case, the software will be trained via machine learning to identify images and radiographs where there's a higher likelihood of feeding tube misplacement. When making determinations of substantial equivalence for products, including a PCCP, the guidance as well as Section 515C of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act require that the subject device is compared to the version of the predicate device that was cleared or approved prior to being modified under the PCCP. And I think that presents a potential challenge to latecomers to the market. So if a device is updated and it has software functions updated through modifications under a PCCP, and a competitor wants to come to market with a substantially equivalent device, that competitor would have to compare their product to the original unmodified version of the product under Section 515C of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act to demonstrate substantial equivalence. And that's a challenge, particularly if the new market entrant wants to include features that the product already has based on the PCC program and would like to include effectively an updated version of the device. So it creates a challenge for latecomers to the market. And I think that there is a first to market advantage here based on how Congress has drafted the substantial equivalence comparison for products subject to a PCCP. In addition, if a device with an approved PCCP experiences a modification that causes it to deviate from the PCCP in a manner that would otherwise require a new marketing submission, the FDA in this guidance indicated they would view further distribution of the device without a new marketing submission as adulteration or misbranding. And so manufacturers should consider developing a fallback protocol in the PCCP so that they can revert their device to an earlier version if they use machine learning to train and update a device, and then it turns out that they would have to submit a new marketing submission and potentially cease distributing the device because of the change. So important, I think, and this isn't necessarily in the guidance, but suggestion, you want to include fallback protocols in the event that machine learning, which it sometimes does, creates changes that don't have the outcome that you want and might not fall squarely within the four corners of the modifications you include in the PCCP. The guidance also includes recommendations on labeling, indicating that labeling should explain the device includes machine learning, may require software updates, and that modifications could change the device's performance or inputs or use. In terms of how changes under a PCCP are implemented, the guidance provides that you should implement these changes within your existing risk management framework. So if a modification is specified within the description of the modifications, it's implemented in accordance with the modification protocol, then per the guidance, a new marketing submission would not be necessary, and you would document the changes in the modification and your analysis and validation of compliance of those changes in accordance with your standard quality system processes. As I may have mentioned earlier, the FDA, however, does view changes to the PCCP itself as requiring a new marketing submission. So again, if you are considering including modifications in the future to your software functions, you should ensure that all of those potential modifications are included in your PCCP, so you don't need to go back and submit a new 510K de novo or PMA. So the main benefit of a PCCP, predetermined change control plan, is that this is a helpful tool that can minimize the need to submit additional marketing submissions when you modify products via machine learning software devices and train them on new data sets. Again, thank you for your time today. I'm Sam Bernstein, again, a partner of McGuire Woods Healthcare Group. I look forward to seeing you next week.